New normality. Good old days, good old days, good old days.
Hey, everybody's talking about the good old days, right? Everybody, the good old days, the good old days.
Good old days.
Well, let's talk about the good old days.
Remember the time we were staring at our smartphones and didn't care about lack of action? We were sitting our butts near the screen watching hours of space program failures, smiling at the respected role models selling their asses to Netflix. Well, those days are over. Welcome to the new normality. What does it mean? How it will affect us, people? The answer was clearly presented in many books, and we used to have this normality before. We just don't remember it, right? So, the end of so called tens was the start of a financial crisis, and so many players started research and development programs. So, everybody was really ready to face this new upcoming 2020s crisis. They just needed to script to play it better. Currently, there are two opposing teams on the stage. One is so-called globalist team and the second is nationals. Both teams are so corrupt and it's very hard to see which player is playing on which team. The guys who own the casino are the so-called controllers, aka Orders Alliance governed by the fake crown members. Oldenburg, Gorgonzola, Romanov, Windsors, and so on. These families were in charge of all the previous resets and wars. They were branded or firewalled by the name of Crown and currently controlling almost 95% of national central banks via banksters, aka cabal. This clan is a descendant of the Hanseatic Union and the pre-Atlantis Trade and Mining Union. So, with all of this lineup, you can see that this game is just a pre-game show. The live exercise.
We're in a live exercise here to get this right. We're in a live exercise here to get this right. We're in a live exercise here to get this right.
The rehearsal, the start of new reality. Rockefeller Foundation described this new normality society as a lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback.
With a veil of Ebola or spreading it from a small plane onto villages. The point is to get hundreds of thousands of people infected with it and create the next phase of control. Now, one of the things I'd like to show to back up my claims here, here's a document from the Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller Foundation right there. You can zoom in on that where my finger is. It's called Scenarios for the Future International Development, the Rockefeller Foundation. All right. Okay, let's take a look at what they're saying here. This is something like a 50, 60-page document. I'd like you to go to page 18, if you can look at this up on the internet, but I'll read it off to you. It's called Lockstep. Lockstep.
The scenario was mentioned in the 2010 document of Rockefeller Foundation amongst other three scenarios, but it looks more probable amid of some similarities that were mentioned in this lockstep narrative. For example, quote, the pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. Another interesting reference was about China. Quote, the Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing of all the borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than other countries, and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. China China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries of communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified in order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics and transnational terrorism to environmental crisis and rising poverty. Leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. At first, the notion of a more controlled world gained with wide acceptance and approval. Citizens willingly gave up some of their sovereignty and their privacy to more paternalistic states in exchange for greater safety and stability. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for top down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in the ways they saw fit. In developed countries, the heightened oversight took many forms: biometric IDs for all citizens, for example, and tighter regulation of key industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. In many developed countries, enforced cooperation with a suite of new regulations and agreements slowly but steadily restored both order and, importantly, economic growth. Well, all this is not only in favor of nationals, as you can see, it's only the total defeat of globalists. It's the idea of isolation as an isolationism, when every country is up to its own rules and craziness. So, is this the new normality, or is it just a step towards the lockstep scenario? I personally think, and I've said this before, the financial and stock market reset was obvious even in November, December 2019. Everything was indicating it. The following event in the closest future is the monetary reset. The evidence shows the script plans it after the next presidential election of Trump or whoever can replace him from his substitutes. Not much time left to see it will happen or not. Time will show. So many microbiologists these days. Everybody wants to be Atlanta Brave and tell us the truth about what's going on. But I'm going to refer to some points I think nobody's talking about right now. Cortisol therapy. Whether you believe in COVID-19 or not, you have to accept the idea that I know that it's real. So let's pretend all of us just put this topic on hold and discuss the actual effects of severe hormone therapy that the population have been receiving for almost 3 months now. I call this a cortisol therapy. The life exercise does not only represent the game the elites play, it can be implementing several methods of population treatment that could be designed from the start by explained by the officials as a collateral damage or side effect at the end of the event. What is cortisol?
Cortisol is a very destructive hormone. It's a stress hormone. It makes belly fat, and there's a lot of theories and mixed, confusing ideas about cortisol.
Cortisol is a steroid hormone in the glucagonide class of hormones. When used as a medication, it's known as a hydrocortisone. It is produced in many animals, mainly by the zona fasciculata or adrenal cortex in the adrenal gland. It's produced in other tissues in low quantities. It is released with the diurnal cycle, and its release is increased in response to stress or low body glucose concentration. It functions to increase blood sugar and to suppress the immune system. Cortisol received the title of stress hormone for the formation of protective reactions to external threats and stressful situations. It enhances the heartbeat, increases blood pressure. At the same time, cortisol keeps vascular tone control, preventing a critical change in blood pressure. In addition, with severe stress, hydrocortisone activates the work of muscles, reducing the glucose consumptions in them while actively borrowing it from other organs. Thus, the hormone mobilizes body's resources to save life. For example, to escape from pursuers, or get out of the under the rubble, fight a deadly enemy, and so on, or work in stressful conditions for several extra hours or even days.
Sun, getting sun on a regular basis. That's very, very, very powerful to lower cortisol. So we have sun and sleep, and then vitamin D will also help as well. You go to the beach, you get sun, and you feel calmer, and then you take a nap. Sleep and sun lower cortisol. So really what you need to do is go to the beach for about 6 months and get sun and sleep. Sun and sleep, and then, I'm just kidding, if you can do that.
But the flip side of the coin is the risk of developing diabetes mellitus and obesity due to the glucose unspent by the muscles in the event that the threat was not followed by the physical activity, for example. After all, stress cannot be saved from the stress in the form of reprimand from the authorities or sad news. Moreover, organs that have not received glucose begin to demand a supplement. A person intuitively relies on sugar. Baked sweets, as they say, sticks to the problem, eating up everything to cover stress feeling. There are several more properties of cortisol which are evaluated ambiguously. So it reduces the number of leukocytes circulating in plasma. On the one hand, it suppresses immune response and triggers inflammatory processes, which causes a slowdown and poor healing of wounds. On the other hand, it helps to block allergic immune reactions if uncontrolled. So synthetic analogs of cortisol, for example, prednisone, relieve acute allergic attacks, help with anaphylactic shock, have a pronounced anti-inflammatory effect, and help with a number of autoimmune diseases. Cortisol regulates protein biosynthesis, but not actually as we would like it. It stimulates in the liver, but in the connective muscle, adipose, and bone tissues. It inhibits its formation and even catalyzes the breakdown of proteins in ribonucleic acids. As a result, the excess of normal amounts cortisol begins to negatively affect muscle tissue, splitting it into amino acids. For this quality, bodybuilders also hate it. With 1C21 steroid, it does not allow pumping up muscles to the desired volume, and it begins to eat up previously pumped up biceps and triceps. And women are unlikely to like the fact that the cortisol inhibits collagen synthesis, which means that it leads to wrinkles, thinning, and sagging skin.
All right, walking is way better than any type of exercise to lower cortisol.
But cortisol has an unlikely peaceful and useful function. It serves as an internal alarm clock and helps us wake up in the morning. It turns out that this is a universal alarm system that puts the body on alert in danger and contributes to vigorous awakening every morning. That's the reason I got used to wake up at 6 a.m. after all this craziness started. I also gained about 10% of my previous weight, and I can see some of my muscles dissolved recently. So that's my experience of this cortisol therapy we receive. And as you know, they want us to produce it because in the state of stress, we act weird and always do what they want from us. Just look at the number of traders who lost their money on the oil drop recently, guessing they would bounce off the $20 level of support. But no, it's not how it works. In the era of new normality, you can tell that the roll of the toilet paper was more expensive than a barrel of Brent oil that day. As I said before, take your money out of these trading games as soon as possible. Only gold is safe haven right now and probably will stay the only one soon. PTSD. The new normality not only ruins our physical and mental health but also gives us the full range of PTSD symptoms. Just imagine how this lockdown will affect our kids and teenagers, high school graduates that got their proms ruined and failed, and future careers to be reconsidered now. I think the essential jobs will be the most wanted in the future because the non-essentials will suck. Who wants to stay locked up if this will repeat in the future? PTSD is a mental disorder that can develop after a person is exposed to traumatic events such as sexual assault, warfare, traffic collisions, child abuse, or other threats on a person's life. Symptoms may include disturbing thoughts, feelings, or dreams related to events, mental or physical distress to trauma-related cues, attempts to avoid trauma-related cues, alterations in how a person thinks and feels. These symptoms last for more than a month and even after the event. Young children are less likely to show distress but instead may express their memories through play. A person with PTSD is at a higher risk for suicide and intentional self-harm. Symptoms of PTSD generally begin with the first 3 months after the inciting traumatic event. So we are just, only can expect it, but may not begin until years later. In a typical case, the individual with PTSD persistently avoids trauma-related thoughts and emotions and discussion of the traumatic event. And that's why it's probably going to be dangerous to talk about it in the future, because everybody's going to be, avoiding these discussions, okay, and may even have amnesia on the event, those people. However, the event is commonly relieved by the individual through intrusive, recurrent recollections, dissociative episode of reliving the trauma, flashbacks, nightmares. While it's common to have symptoms after any traumatic event, this must be persist to a sufficient degree for longer, because it's like clinical levels of distress, I'd say, for longer than 1 month after the trauma to be classified as PTSD. Clinically significant dysfunction or distress for less than 1 month after the trauma may be acute stress disorder, but whatever. Some following a traumatic event experience is like post-traumatic growth. So
I just left the motherfucking hospital. And guess what the fuck I got diagnosed with? Type shit. Y'all just stay, bro. This shit sick, y'all. I'm mad as hell right now. I don't think y'all understand. It's my fault, though. Because I should have been outside like the fuck they told us not to be. For real, for real. Because people really dying from this shit, bro. I got coronavirus. This shit is sick, bro. Stay the fuck home, y'all. Feel me? Come on, now. These bitches ain't even accurate. They testing us for shit. They testing you and sending you home, and you thinking you don't got coronavirus, right? They testing you, sending you home, thinking you don't got coronavirus, and you passing it to somebody else, and then you passing it to somebody else, and the third person you pass it to, they so happen to go get tested, and they test positive for the shit, even though you tested negative for the shit, bro.
Persons considered at risk include combat military personnel, so like those National Guards or whatever, victims of national disasters. So this is a national disaster. Concentration camp survivors. We are locked down now. We're like concentration camp survivors. Actually, doesn't remind you our situation? Persons employed in occupation that expose them to violence or disasters, such as an emergency service workers, are also at risk. Other occupations that are at high risk include police officers, firefighters, ambulance personnel, healthcare professionals, train drivers, divers, journalists, sailors, and many more. In addition to people who work at banks, post office, and stores. So obviously most of those works that are essentials right now at the high risk of receiving PTSD. So it's like unexpected death of a loved one, also the case. Sudden unexpected death of the loved one is the most common traumatic event type reported across national studies. However, the majority of people who experience this type of event will not go to develop PTSD, but analysis says that 5.2% risk of developing PTSD after learning an unexpected death of a loved one. So right now, everybody can experience that.
I am Kyla Rage, the editor and owner of Dishing the Dirt with Rage. I live in the Bronx, New York. It's considered a part of New York City. I am telling you guys about what is going on in New York City. I had a really long day. We are suffering from the rampage of the coronavirus in New York City. This virus is real. This virus is killing everyone. There is no age limit. Regardless to what they say, 80-something and over are not just dying. 50 and over are not just dying. 20 and something are not just dying. Today, I lost my sister to the coronavirus. But let me tell you how it happened. My sister went to New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan. First, they told her she had bronchitis and not the coronavirus. She went back again. Then they told her she had pneumonia and not the coronavirus. They still didn't test. Then they told her she had the flu and not the coronavirus. It wasn't until she was put on a ventilator and unconscious that they decided to test her, and she died.
Unexpected death of a loved one accounts for approximately 20% of all the PTSD cases worldwide. And also life-threatening illnesses we experience right now. Medical conditions associated with the increased risk of PTSD include cancer, heart attack, stroke. 22% of cancer survivors present with lifelong PTSD-like symptoms. Just imagine how many people don't receive their the intensive care, the surgery they have to receive. Just all this canceled, and switched further after the quarantine. But who knows when the quarantine is gonna be, really ending. Those intensive care units, patients are always this intensive care hospitalization is also a huge risk for PTSD. Loved ones of those who experience life-threatening illnesses are also at risk for developing PTSD, so such as parents of child with chronic illnesses, or who knows if he was in ICU or whatever. So this is a very serious side effect we should witness alone with the future in our state of new normality. Lies, more lies, and the statistics. In the times of new normality, we should care about stats more. We should learn how to read them, how to ignore the fake stats, and how to figure out what the stats represent. For example, there's a big difference if you comment stats either way you want, okay? For example, the stats no one is talking about, but they at least know, are not the stats you guys read about in the media, like that the COVID is the second contagious disease after measles, with 3.1 persons getting infected in average, or like that men have twice more lethality rate than women. Only 5% of infected get to be in ICU, and up to 80% of the patients on ventilators die due to different reasons. There are more interesting stats on the virus nature itself, like that there is a certain infection dose that only several percent of people get during the contact with the infected. In general, it's around 10 to 5% of people the infected person meets. So returning to the previous stats, it's a very probable situation with no symptomatic patients, because they walk around. Only 5 to 10% get the virus to pass their throats and dive into the lungs, and only half of those have the so-called pneumonia type of symptoms, which generally is a new type of severe respiratory infection attacking the alveolus, and it looks like a made glass on the computerized tomography screens. So in general, there are no stats on the immunity and no guarantees that the healed patient won't catch the virus again in the same or other form. Remember the flu mutations each year? Like right now, they have decoded at least 3 types of this COVID-19, so it was mutation friendly as any other virus of flu. Welcome to the new normality. The stats will stay with us for quite a while, so let's read the stats correctly. Win-win. And this is postscriptum for today about the win-win narrative. It's a drill with a win-win result in any way of the development of the event. Like each and every leader in charge will absorb more power if literally anything happens. The more dead people, the strictly the quarantine, the result will be less dead people, a big credit won. Less dead people, less strict is the quarantine, the result will be more happy people, a big credit won. Every big player will be competing with himself, and the media will be like helping him or not, like there is no other opponent. I mean, current Trump is competing with the before Trump. Current Putin will compete with only the previous Putin, and so on. Now you can blame everything on COVID and China, and you will win. There will be no more competition in the politics. The scripted narrative tells us the time of digital slavery have come. The window of opportunity was shut down. No more pain in the ass of the leaders. Only the controlled opposition and players on assist. Win-win paradigm is only for them, the elites, but we're losing big time. Both waves, obviously. So forget about the past and welcome to the new normality. Thanks a lot, guys, and see you later. Bye.